You're now experiencing data with Brian O'Neill. Experiencing Data explores how product managers, analytics leaders, data scientists, and executives are looking at design and user experience as a way to make their custom enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. And now, here's your host, the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics, Brian O'Neill.
Excited to have Kathy Koontz on the line. She is the executive director of the Analytics Leadership Consortium at the International Institute for Analytics. That's quite a mouthful. Did I get that totally right?
Yeah, you did. I tell people, yes, it is a real job, but yeah, you got it right. You nailed it.
What and tell our listeners, like what does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah. Okay, so the International Institute for Analytics is an organization that was founded by Tom Davenport, one of the early leaders in using analytics for business performance. And so we are a research and advisory firm that helps companies realize value from analytics.
And so how do you work with them, like in your leadership capacity there? What's your specific role there?
I lead the product line that's called the Analytics Leadership Consortium. And what that is a group of analytics executives from different companies who are in non-competing industries that meet on a regular basis to better understand trends and best practices in analytics, to vet ideas with one another, and ensure that they're doing the best that they can to deliver analytics value for their organization. It's a really great opportunity for leaders in this field of analytics that's changing a lot and has a lot of emerging practices, have regular time to get together in a confidential setting to understand, what's working and what's not, and how they can improve analytic value for their company.
And you mentioned, trends. I obviously trying to stay on top of what's going on in that industry, and that's actually how I came across you originally. I think you guys had put out a webinar on 5 trends in analytics going on right now. And at the end of that, you had mentioned that one of the things that's starting to change now is the importance of design and user experience as we move beyond, designing reports, and which is one of the most typical, deliverables, so to speak, of analytics as we move into user experience becoming more important. That's what I was like, oh, this could be really interesting to hear what you have to say about what's changing. Like why is UX now relevant? How is capital D design relevant to the world of analytics? And so that's what I was curious to learn about. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think as analytics mature in organizations, the need for design is what's going to drive adoption and utilization of those analytics. So, in companies that are just starting their analytics journey, it's a little bit easier to realize analytic value by doing, a couple of really big data science projects that don't really require a lot of design thinking. It's a PowerPoint to an executive group that has some, higher level, organizational level thinking that, the executives lean in, understand the analytics, understand the value of making their decisions in line with the analytics, and then move on and do their regular roles. But as organizations try to make analytics more pervasive, particularly into frontline associates or individual contributors who are really using analytics to make a lot of small decisions within the execution of their work, or as they try to integrate analytics into processes that are monitored, that design thinking, taking an approach of user experience, can really break down a lot of barriers that organizations encounter when trying to have people who are not necessarily used to using analytics in their decision-making process use them so that they can make a better decision for the organization.
Is the trend that people are recognizing the problem because they went through some pain of, like, maybe they delivered some big multi-million-dollar platform, and like you said, the frontline associates didn't use it, or it's like, well, they're, as I always use the example, it's like they're out driving a truck. they don't have a laptop and they're not going to go download a report and change the columns or whatever. It's like the wrong mechanism. You didn't fit it into their job. You tried to get them to change their job to accommodate your tool. Is the awareness because they went through a failure? Or is it kind of like, we already know this isn't going to work if we don't get the UX right, just because companies are a little bit more design aware these days? Or what drove that to change? Why is it now?
Well, I think there's two things. And first of all, it's, they've failed. They've invested millions of dollars in some sort of, decision support sort of application that may have, millions of dollars in data integration work that was done to build it, and purchased a lot of really advanced software that can help, users slice and dice the data and dive in and understand it. But they really took more of a data-centric approach rather than a user-centric approach. Mm-hmm. And so, they really didn't take it that extra step to say, how does this person go through their normal day in their decision making? Where do they need this information in that decision making? And how should it be best presented so that they don't have to do any sort of cognitive task switching, that it just fits into how they go about making their decisions? And so I think those failures are one big driver. But then I also think as organizations move up the analytic maturity curve and move really from, BI reports to predictive analytics to proscriptive analytics, those prescriptive analytics are going to be much more pervasive across the organization. And so I think it's this analytics maturity that's also driving this need to put more design thinking into the creation of analytic products.
Do you have any specific examples of like a company that may have like, hey, version 1 was X and we didn't get what we wanted. Version Y was, or X.2. We then went back and, tried to fit this in better with that employee, and we saw, some kind of change as a result. Do you cite any examples of how design allowed the data to actually be insightful and create a meaningful change?
One was a project that I was involved in at a large property and casualty insurance company. We were trying to alert our franchised insurance agents if they had somebody in their book of business who was likely to not renew. It was based on really good data science and model scores with different, clear deciles that showed significant likelihood to attrite between them. And it was originally deployed in a separate application with, I think, maybe some general groupings of how likely they were to leave. And the utilization of it was more of a curiosity at that point. There were some adopters, but not as broad as would be hoped to really be able to substantively move the needle on this. And, as the design was redone and integrated into their overall CRM system, was a widget on their CRM system that came up when they logged in the morning. They didn't have to go look to see. It was there for them. As we moved from groupings and scores into 1-star to 5-star, 5-star is they're likely to go. You really need to work those. So just very simple little changes that drove a significant change in the utilization of that capability.
Do you know what the blockers were such that it took a redesign? Like, so if someone was listening to this and they're like, I'm that person right now, we don't want to go through not the failure, but maybe the learning experience that your company went through. What do you do to prevent that? Is there here are some roadblocks to watch out for?
The thing is, these products are usually developed by folks within a data science group. And, we have the data and we know this is a business problem and we've done the analytics and, that is expected, but not sufficient, right? Then the next step is to really, use just, basic research techniques from, consumer companies. go out and watch your user group that you want to, utilize this data or these analytics to improve the performance. See how they do their job. What tools do they use? Where would this information be most relevant? How can it be presented in the context of their general activities, right? Where it's not a separate thing, where it's integrated into the stuff that shows up on their performance evaluations, right? That's the way to really avoid some of the deployments that may have really great data and science behind them, but don't get the user adoption that's needed. So just take that extra step and really understand the user and where this information is going to be most relevant for them.
Do you think the appetite from executives and people that are at the top of the reporting chain for these things support the time and the effort to go out and do that type of research, or to try to fit it in and not so much focus on, when are we releasing code and like, when's the next, show me some progress. They want to see a GUI, just show me some proof that this millions of dollars is doing something versus, this kind of squishy. It can be squishy for some, at least in my experience with certain executives, that especially qualitative stuff. Well, how many people did you talk to? It's like, oh, we talked to 8 so far. It's like, we have 10,000 employees, and so it's hard for certain ones to understand the value of qualitative research in these things. Do you have any experience or thoughts about that?
I think it can be squishy, but I think really analytics, especially being deployed pervasively, is maybe not a project, but more of a transformation program. And you have to take a transformation program perspective to it, which includes such squishy things as change management and business process redesign. Whatever scale or breadth you do that, I think it is key, somebody using those analytics within their decision-making process is really where the organization gets value from it. That GUI, that code that gets released and deployed, that is an interim step, but it is not the final step to that organization getting value, right? And so, maybe you're just a data scientist at a company trying to design a really great, deploy a great app that could, help a group of, marketing folks better invest marketing, or supply chain folks better manage, costs of suppliers. It doesn't have to be this big concerted professional effort, right? Mm-hmm. One way to do that in a very agile, low cost way is find a couple of folks that seem to be really jazzed about getting this, right? And use them as some beta testers. And so maybe you start out with just the information on spreadsheets to say, hey, does this make sense from just from a pure, is this information that you would use? And then have them walk you through, where would you use this information? How would it be best presented to you? And then think about working within the constraints you have of, maybe you can't change the screen for this, digital marketing spend that somebody uses, but how can you make that information as accessible as possible, where it really is more of a push of information at the right time, as opposed to pull of information that a human being has to remember to go get when they're in the process of executing, quote, their day job.
Yeah, you hit on some great stuff there. So, and I talk about this to my list quite frequently, which is, understanding tasks and workflows and people's day-to-day jobs. That the goal is to fit your solution into their existing behavior as much as possible. It's really hard to change behaviors to, I got to go remember now to load this other screen and pull out this number on page 2 and then tape it, paste it into this other screen and then hit enter and then it does some analytics and then I go, this is the kind of stuff why people don't bother to do it. It's like, well, my guess is good enough. I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm just going to whatever. No one's going to know if I did that or not. They don't know where that number came from. And so they don't want to do it. And so first of all, it's understand that pain. And then another good technique there is to, if you're going to improve a process and you need to change behavior, we want people to use this new tool in order to realize this new value. It's to ask them to replay. First of all, understand that benchmark of like what their existing workflow, their playbook is, and then ask them to do the same playbook using the new platform. And this is a great way to uncover the things that you don't know to ask about necessarily, because if you first get that model of how they do it now, it'll help elucidate those gaps that we can't see. Because you can provide a new design, but you don't, there was I just read an article about, there was an example like let's imagine designing a new hotel room. And you might take for granted that hotel room has a bathroom, right? But as Jared Spool was talking about this, like you'd be really surprised if you walked in and there was no bathroom because no one stated that was a requirement. And because everyone just took it for granted. And so it's those kind of things that you won't see as a data scientist or product manager, perhaps, because you don't know what this, frontline worker is necessarily doing all day. But I love that you talked about, getting into the minds of what people are doing and fitting your solution into them. So do you have any comments though about one problem I see is that in some places it's really hard to get access to customers. I think sometimes this is more on enterprise companies that are selling a product that has data, data is a big part of it. It can be hard to access them. You would think, companies doing internal analytics, that this would be easier. Do you think that comes from leadership? Do you think that comes from the ground up? Like any comments on how do you get access to the right people? And what if they're not being like, hey, I'm a call center. Like I get paid hourly by the number of calls I do, and you want me to go work on your new software. Like, why should I? How do you incentivize that, right? So that they become a design partner, which ultimately is really where you want to go, is to have a team of partners from subject matter experts and product managers, the data science people, whoever it is that is going to affect the solution that comes out. But what needs to change in order to incentivize that participation? It takes time, right, to get these things right.
Yeah, for sure. And we see that a lot just because, as you noted, the breadth of the organization or the different, incentives and priorities that other groups might have. And so, I hear companies all the time, senior leaders, we are going to be an analytics competitor and we're going to, do analytics. And, they think if they hire 200 PhD data scientists that, they are now an analytics company, right? And so, I do think you've got to have somebody at a leadership role, at least over the data science group, say, look, this company gets value from this when we're making better decisions because of these analytics. And those better decisions are going to come from people accessing the analytics when they're in their decision-making process, right? And really working more leader to leader, but that can't be where it stops. And you've got to create kind of peer relationships at all levels, number one. And then number two, I think if you get the leadership of the other group engaged early on, and this is a problem that they feel they have ownership in and that they are a co-creator with you, and that starts at a leader level and then works its way down, then I think you're going to have greater access and more ability to do that. And then finally, in the absence of that, if you don't get it, right, then I would at least, as you're deploying the new app, say our next step is to watch the staff members use it and identify, how to better integrate it so that at least you're showing some leadership in your thinking that I know this is going to be a problem because I didn't have access to them and I'm already teeing it up. We're going to have to come back and see how people are using it and how we can utilize some user experience and design thinking in a subsequent phase after it's been released.
You're listening to Experiencing Data, the podcast that explores how design and user experience make enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. Your host is Brian O'Neill of Designing for Analytics, designer, UX consultant, and advisor to the business leaders behind custom enterprise data products and analytics applications. For more information, visit designingforanalytics.com. If you're enjoying the show, help Brian out by rating it on iTunes. And now, back to Brian.
Some of my clients in the past, they have to go through a failure first in order to decide that they don't want to do it we don't want to do the build first, design second, process on the next one.
Right.
But it does take, there's a certain level of convincing that can happen. And then at some point you got to move forward, because typically IT or the business, they have been tasked with deploy this new, model and the software into the service. And they're going to do that no matter what. They're not going to stop and wait for design if that organization doesn't have a mature design practice. So you might have to go through that. I would say, obviously, it's always cheaper to adjust things in pixels and pencils than it is to adjust it in working code. So the more you can get in front of these decisions and inform the engineering and the data science prior to those big, deploying a large application, it's a lot cheaper and it's a lot easier, and you don't have all the change costs associated with that, both time, money, labor, and no one likes to do it twice. Most people want to work on new problems. They don't want to redo the same ones. Engineers usually don't like doing that. So, getting in front of
I think
is good.
I think what you're touching on there is, maybe if you haven't done your user design work, then you think about this release is a beta release, and you plan this release and you plan this app and you manage your code knowing it's going to change at some point and knowing it's going to change soon. And then the second thing is, key point is to decouple the analytic insight from the application, right? So, there is an analytic insight, whether it's a number or a recommendation or some score or something. If it is just, loosely coupled to the delivery mechanism, then it is easier from, a code engineering perspective to have it delivered in a different way.
Right. No, that's great. And part of that's the attitude and the culture of change and not falling in love with our first versions of stuff. And to me, that has to be kind of ingrained in both the engineering, all the teams that are touching the product or the service that's being put out there. If that's not there, a lot of companies say they're doing agile. A lot of them are not. They're skipping one of the most important parts, which is getting some kind of customer representation involved and actually iterating, and not just doing incremental design where you keep adding more, add another feature, add another data point. That's incremental design. That's not iterating and changing as you get feedback. So, that's something to watch out for as well. And, at some point you need to get some stuff out there, and the costs have come down, obviously, to deploy software. It's overall cheaper to get something out there quickly and to start getting feedback on it. But it's very easy to not get the feedback and to let working code feel like success until someone at the top says, where's all the bang we're supposed to get for this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, though I think the approach there, right, is get it deployed, right? Okay, so that's great. It's out there and it's working, right? But again, just know that, build into your deployment plan this, user feedback and change from there, right? So if you are not fully deployed until after you have received this feedback and implemented the needed changes within the application, then, I think that's another way to kind of prevent that falling in love with your first design. That this is just deployed so that people can use it, and that giving you feedback and making those needed changes is an expected part of the deployment process and is not a failure that the application was not sufficient.
I think that should be part of any software development process, to have a loop, a loop of test, design, refine, deploy in a circle, because you're never done with this stuff. I mean, for the most part, for larger applications, you're never really done with it. It's a process of getting better and figuring out the ROI. Like, have we hit the mark yet? Is it worth spending more time and money on this? But yeah, those are great insights. So I'm curious, like, in terms of the roles, I feel like someone that's at the top of at the responsibility chain here needs to have a healthy dose of skepticism about their own stuff, like especially when it comes to like prescriptive and predictive analytics or any service where it's custom software they're deploying into the organization. Have a healthy dose of skepticism about how great it really is. Maybe you deployed on time, bug-free, you can see the stats and all of this, but is that responsibility primarily falling into the data science realm because companies are investing in that area right now? And so they become the de facto, what we would call a product manager more in the SaaS world? Do they kind of become that? And is that the right place for that responsibility to be?
I see that happen really not necessarily through design and or design and intention, but just because if they want, if a data scientist wants to take this great science that he's discovered and make it accessible, in a lot of organizations, they have to do it, right? And so it's put upon them when they're probably not well prepared for that. And so, I do think that that's a problem. And then, as a lot of different tools and capabilities make it easier for data scientists to deploy applications, if there's not a really good user design construct within whatever application they're deploying their data science application in, then, they need to be the ones to take that extra step. And, as I said earlier, right, oftentimes the data scientists see the world through data and algorithms and predictions, and they get enamored with the complexity of the model and the strength of its prediction, right, and not so much with how easy it is for somebody to use it. And I think that's probably a kind of just a reorientation with perhaps training that should happen within data science groups around design best practices and user experience design. I mean, they're not going to be, they're not going to evolve into great user experience designers, but they are going to be able to recognize something that's really bad and perhaps ask for help and guidance to make it better.
Do you think that'll stick then, that role will continue to live there? This person that needs to understand the business, like the business value that needs to be obtained, the user experience side of it, and the technology side. It's kind of the trifecta there. Do you think that'll stay in that data science world?
I don't think so. So I do think there will be a separation between the data application design and the creation of the data science that informs that feeds into that application. Mm-hmm. And I think, as we talked about, as some of these companies get, more companies get more mature and need to have more, pervasive deployment of data science insights, they're going to realize that they need to take a different approach. And I've often said that in data and analytics, I see the industry maturing along the lines of software development, right? And so that design focus was not a big part of software development early on, and I think it's just gonna have to happen within data science.
Yeah, I look at it this way. Product owners can take many different titles. Like I've had all kinds of different clients, but ultimately the buck stops with everybody that's working on it. But it helps to have someone that's kind of at that intersection of what do we need to do? What's the overall picture of this? And they understand the tech, the business, and the user experience side. So whatever the title of that person is, that role to me is really critical so that technology doesn't run with everything, or you don't, you kind of have to have all three of those ingredients to deploy successfully. At least in my experience, it seems like that's pretty critical to have that.
Yeah, for sure. And we hear a number of organizations that ask about how do we show the value of our data science investments, right? How do we demonstrate our data science ROI? And I think if more data science groups really looked at how their data science products were being consumed and started quantifying those, and then using some of the business metrics that are involved with that business process, right? Whether it's optimizing a spend or reducing average handle time at the call center, that would give them a great path to be able to validate their ROI to the organization. But I don't see a lot of data science groups doing that.
Who asked that question? Is it the data scientists themselves, or is it the business stakeholder who's hiring the data scientists, or like what role asks that?
Usually it's a data science leader who has a large organization, and, in large enterprise organizations, if you have a large organization with a lot of expensive resources, there's a continuing need to show the value that this organization brings to the overall company, especially when the output of that organization is not well understood or has not been a traditional part of that company, right? So, a lot of senior executives, C-suite executives at large organizations didn't have data science when they were coming up through the ranks, right? So this is kind of something new that they don't really understand. They know how much money they spend on it, and a lot of data science organizations will need to demonstrate, here's the hard line benefit that this company has gotten for investing in data science capabilities.
This kind of blends nicely into my next question, which is about, obviously, AI and machine learning are hot topics right now in technology. And how do these companies, so you hear signals, I hear this from people I talk to frequently, which is, oh, the board knows we're supposed to be doing some AI, and they're asking me, like, how many sensors do we have installed? And do we have digital transformation? And they ask these really high-end questions, and they want to go spend some money on it because they're so afraid they're going to miss the boat on that. And from a design standpoint, we would say that smells, that reeks of possibly putting a cart before the horse. The tool comes out, we got to go buy this hammer because everyone else is buying this hammer and we have no idea what you hit with it, but we got to have it. We got to go spend some money on it. How do you ensure that you don't waste money? You want to invest in this. You don't want to miss the boat. Maybe there's potential for a project to do to deploy machine learning which is pretty much what a lot of these companies are doing in terms of AI right now. But how do you make sure that the desired investment from the business is actually going to have some kind of ROI? They've heard this tool is hot.
It's what I call the hype cycle mandate, right? So,
right.
Whatever is the new thing, right? It was a big data. It was, AI and machine learning, right? It was data scientists, right? We have to have them. We have to tell the board we're doing this. I think that is where executives earn their money, is being able to manage the message to the senior leaders who may not understand what's needed and how you use it, so that they can say, yes, we're using it, but the leadership, then the executive leadership, are the ones who have to go out and figure out where are the business problems and what is actually needed within our operating environment and our company to really deliver value from this capability. And, I will say oftentimes I see executives making the right call in that way. Mm-hmm. I have seen cases where folks have gone out and bought a lot of software and hardware and stuff that they have no idea of how they're going to use. And that's a shame.
Do you think the right step there is to take on a small project, find a small win, show a small value, and you can at least satisfy are we doing some? Yes, we're doing some machine learning or whatever. Do you think that's the way it starts?
Yeah, I am a big, just in any data or analytic investment, a big fan of use case based development, right? So, come up with a use case that requires this type of capability to execute it at the scale and precision that's needed, mm-hmm. and then do some pilots to prove out the value, show the value, and then, that builds out the business case for the larger deployment that way. So, yeah, I totally agree with that, Brian. Start with a use case. Start small, understand, have an eye towards scaling as you start small, but get a small win, show that you've done it. The CEO can, in all honesty, say, yeah, we're doing machine learning, and, we're going about it in a way that is very, fiscally sound, but will also put us in a position to be able to compete with this capability in a quick amount of time.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think there's I don't know who said it, but this concept of falling in love with the problem. And if you your team or the people that work for you or whoever it may be can fall in love with the problem and then weaponize your machine learning against that. That's always a great thing, is to get everyone kind of jazzed about the problem, so that you know that, especially if you can line it up with that technology, not that the goal is to do that, but that's when the big wins happen, at least in my experience. So this has been awesome. Do you have any advice for overall what we talked about in terms of data product managers or data science leaders, analytics leaders, in terms of design experience, what they should be looking for going forward, and just in general bringing more value to the customers? Is there a theme or something on your mind right now that needs to get communicated to them?
Yeah, my theme is, data science is about big, complex data and a lot of technology and really advanced math, but there's still human beings who have to use it, right? Don't forget the humans, right?
Yeah.
And so focus in on how great this data set is that you created, or how advanced this analytic technique is that you're using. But remember, the humans are your last line to realizing value from all of this stuff you've done before. So make sure you keep them in mind as you go through all of those other steps as well.
I think that's great advice. You can't, and it sucks, those pesky humans.
I know. They just get in the way of all this greatness.
Well, this is awesome. I have one last question for you, and that's, have you ever surfed on a river?
I have not.
You're a surfer, right? That came up in the webinar.
Yeah.
Like, I just saw this article in the Times about river surfing, and I'm like, I got to ask Kathy about it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of videos around that, right? I think it's like this bore tide where the tidal action creates like this perfect wave that you can surf like forever. And there's some really good videos of folks doing that down in Brazil, with some of the rivers that are draining out into the Amazon and other rivers that are draining out. So yeah, it looks really awesome. But, there's this surf ranch in California that has this man-made wave. Kelly Slater, I think, worked to create the engineering for this technology. And that's exactly what it looks like, are those river bore waves. But I've seen actually somebody in Munich surfing one of those before too, a video of that. So it's on my bucket list, Brian.
Sweet. Well, where can, you'll have to put the links. I want to put a link to the surf camp, but where can we put some links to you? Where can people find you on the interwebs? Yeah,
you can find me on LinkedIn. I am Kathy Koontz, and you can also find me at the International Institute for Analytics. So it's iianalytics.com, and that's our website. But my LinkedIn name is Customer Journey Koontz, because that's always been my passion, is using data and analytics for customer journeys. And so that's where you can find me on LinkedIn.
Well, I will put those links in the show notes. And this was super awesome. Thanks for coming and talking to me today. I'm sure people are going to enjoy listening to this. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Brian. Have a good day.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Experiencing Data with Brian O'Neill. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it with the hashtag #ExperiencingData. To get future podcast updates or to subscribe to Brian's mailing list, where he shares his insights on designing valuable enterprise data products and applications, visit designingforanalytics.com/podcast.